The stagecoach lurched violently as Olivia Nash pressed her gloved hand against the worn leather seat, her heart hammering when she saw 3 armed men blocking the dusty trail ahead, their faces covered with bandanas and rifles raised toward the driver. It was late September 1878, and Olivia had been traveling from Cheyenne to Hot Springs, South Dakota, carrying nothing but a worn carpet bag and the deed to a small boarding house her late aunt had left her. At 22 years old, she had never expected to be starting over in a remote frontier town. But life had given her little choice after her father's gambling debts had consumed everything they owned back in Pennsylvania. The West promised opportunity, and Olivia had learned to be grateful for whatever mercies came her way. The stagecoach driver, an older man named Bill, pulled hard on the reins, and the horses whinnied in protest. Olivia could hear his voice, tight with fear, calling out to the men, "We do not have much, gentlemen, just passengers and mail." "We will be the judge of that," one of the bandits called back, his voice rough and threatening. "Get down slow and tell your passengers to step out where we can see them." Olivia's fingers trembled as she reached for her reticule, wondering if she should hide the small amount of money she carried, or if that would only make things worse. Across from her sat an elderly woman who had barely spoken the entire journey, and beside Olivia was a traveling salesman who now looked as though he might be sick. Before Bill could climb down from his perch, before the door could even open, a sound like thunder erupted from somewhere to the left of the trail. Olivia twisted toward the window and saw a massive figure on horseback charging toward them from the pine-covered hillside. The man rode a powerful bay horse, and even from a distance, Olivia could see the breadth of his shoulders and the rifle he held with expert ease. "Get moving!" the stranger roared at Bill, firing a shot into the air that sent the bandits' horses rearing. "Drive, now!" Bill did not need to be told twice. He cracked the whip, and the stagecoach jerked forward so violently that Olivia was thrown back against her seat. Through the cloud of dust, she glimpsed the mysterious rider positioning himself between the stagecoach and the would-be robbers, firing warning shots that kept them at bay. The elderly woman cried out, clutching her bag to her chest, and the salesman muttered prayers under his breath. Olivia could only stare out the window as the stagecoach careened down the trail at a reckless pace, leaving the confrontation behind. The stranger on horseback followed at a distance, ensuring the bandits did not give chase. After what felt like an eternity but could not have been more than 10 minutes, Bill finally slowed the horses to a more manageable speed. Olivia's entire body ached from being jostled about, and her bonnet had come loose, sending auburn curls tumbling around her face. She struggled to catch her breath, her hands still shaking from the surge of fear that had coursed through her. The rider caught up to them, and Olivia heard him exchange words with Bill. Then the stagecoach came to a complete stop, and the door opened. The man who had saved them stood there, even more imposing up close than he had seemed from a distance. He was easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that strained against his buckskin shirt and arms that showed the kind of strength that came from years of hard living in the mountains. His hair was dark brown, hanging past his collar in thick waves, and his face was all hard angles and sun-bronzed skin. A beard covered his jaw, but it was neatly trimmed, and his eyes were the most striking shade of gray Olivia had ever seen, like storm clouds gathering over distant peaks. "Everyone all right in here?" he asked, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle given his fierce appearance. The elderly woman nodded mutely, and the salesman managed to stammer out his thanks. Olivia found herself unable to look away from their rescuer, her voice caught somewhere in her throat. "Yes," she finally managed. "Thank you. You saved us." Something flickered in those gray eyes as they met hers, an expression Olivia could not quite read. He gave a short nod, then turned to speak with Bill again. "Those men have been causing trouble along this route for weeks," the stranger said. "I have been tracking them. Name is Magnus Hale. I have a cabin about 5 miles north of Hot Springs. I am heading that direction anyway, so I will ride alongside until we reach town. Make sure there is no more trouble." "Much obliged, Mr. Hale," Bill said, relief evident in his weathered face. "We would not have stood a chance without you." Magnus simply nodded again, then mounted his horse with fluid grace despite his size. True to his word, he rode beside the stagecoach as it continued toward Hot Springs, his presence a reassuring guard against any further danger. Olivia could not stop herself from watching him through the window. There was something mesmerizing about the way he sat his horse, completely at ease in the wilderness, his eyes constantly scanning the landscape for threats. He looked like a man who had been carved from the mountains themselves, all raw strength and quiet competence. "That is Magnus Hale?" the elderly woman whispered, finally finding her voice. "I have heard of him. They say he is a mountain man, lives up in the hills mostly by himself. Brings furs and game into town to trade, but keeps to himself otherwise. Some folks say he is dangerous, but I think today proves otherwise." "He certainly did not hesitate," Olivia murmured, still watching the man through the window. She wondered what would drive someone to live such a solitary existence, away from civilization and comfort. The landscape began to change as they drew closer to Hot Springs. The pine forests gave way to rocky outcroppings, and eventually to the small valley where the town nestled. Hot Springs was smaller than Olivia had imagined, just a few streets lined with wooden buildings, but it had a certain rough charm. She could see the steam rising from the natural hot springs that gave the town its name, and the black hills rose majestically in the distance. When the stagecoach finally rolled to a stop in front of the general store that doubled as the stage office, Magnus dismounted and helped Bill with the luggage. Olivia watched as he lifted her trunk as though it weighed nothing, the muscles in his arms flexing beneath the buckskin. She felt her cheeks warm and quickly looked away. "Where are you heading, miss?" Magnus asked, and Olivia realized he was speaking to her. I have inherited a boarding house from my aunt," she said, fumbling with her reticule. "On Maple Street, I believe. The Morning Star boarding house." Recognition sparked in Magnus's eyes. "I knew your aunt, Catherine Nash. She was a good woman. I am sorry for your loss." The genuine sympathy in his voice surprised Olivia and touched something deep inside her. "Thank you. I never got to meet her, actually. My father and she had a falling out years ago. But she remembered me in her will, and I needed a fresh start." Magnus studied her for a long moment, and Olivia had the unsettling feeling that he could see more than she intended to reveal. "Maple Street is just 2 blocks that way," he said, pointing. "I can carry your trunk over if you like. Town is safe enough, but after what happened today, I would feel better seeing you settled." "You have already done so much," Olivia protested, though the offer was tempting. She was exhausted, still shaken, and the thought of navigating an unfamiliar town alone felt overwhelming. "It is no trouble," Magnus said simply, already hefting her trunk onto his shoulder. Olivia had little choice but to follow him down the dusty street, very aware of the curious looks they drew from townspeople. She supposed they made an odd pair, the travel-worn young woman in her modest gray dress and the massive mountain man carrying her belongings. The Morning Star boarding house was a 2-story structure that had seen better days, but the bones were good, and Olivia felt a flutter of hope as she took in the wide porch and the remnants of what had once been a flower garden. Magnus set her trunk down by the front door and produced a key from his pocket. "Your aunt gave this to me for safekeeping before she passed," he explained. Asked me to make sure the place was looked after until someone came to claim it. Olivia took the key, her fingers briefly brushing his calloused palm. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her. You have been maintaining it? Some, Magnus admitted. Made sure the roof did not leak, kept squirrels out of the attic. Your aunt was kind to me when I first came to these parts. Seemed right to return the favor. The inside of the boarding house was dusty but remarkably well preserved. The furniture was covered with sheets, and everything had a musty smell from being closed up. But Olivia could see the care her aunt had put into the place. There was a large common room with a fireplace, a dining area, and what appeared to be a kitchen in the back. A staircase led to the upper floor where the guest rooms presumably were. It will need work, Magnus said, setting her trunk in the entryway. But it is solid. Your aunt ran a good establishment. Always had boarders, mostly minors, and the occasional traveling family. Olivia turned to thank him properly, but the words died on her lips when she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and the air between them felt charged with something Olivia did not quite understand. I should let you get settled, Magnus said finally, though he made no move toward the door. If you need anything, help with repairs or such, my cabin is up in the foothills. Anyone in town can point you the right direction. Mr. Hale, Olivia said quickly before he could leave, would you allow me to make you dinner, as thanks for everything you have done today? I know it is not much, but I am a good cook, and it is the least I can offer. Magnus looked surprised, then almost uncertain, which seemed odd for a man who had faced down armed bandits without flinching. You do not owe me anything, Miss Nash. I know, Olivia said, but I would like to. Please. After a long moment, Magnus nodded. All right. I have some business in town to attend to. I could come back in a few hours, if that suits you. That would be perfect, Olivia said, unable to stop the smile that spread across her face. After Magnus left, Olivia threw herself into making the boarding house presentable. She uncovered furniture, swept floors, and managed to get the old stove working after some trial and error. A trip to the general store yielded basic provisions, and the proprietor, a friendly woman named Mrs. Keller, was happy to extend credit against the boarding house's good reputation. Your aunt was well loved here, Mrs. Keller told her warmly. We are glad to have you, Miss Nash, and I heard what happened on the trail today. Thank goodness Magnus was nearby. That man has saved more lives than anyone realizes. He seems quite remarkable, Olivia said carefully, not wanting to reveal too much of her fascination. Mrs. Keller gave her a knowing look. That he is. Keeps to himself mostly, but he has a good heart. Lost his whole family in a fire back in Montana, from what I understand. Came down here to start fresh, but I think the grief keeps him isolated. He's only 26, you know, though he seems older with all that experience living rough. Olivia felt a pang of sympathy for Magnus. She understood loss, understood the need to escape painful memories. Perhaps that was part of what she had sensed in him, that shared understanding of sorrow. By the time Magnus returned, Olivia had managed to prepare a respectable meal of roasted chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread she had bought from the bakery. She had also tidied herself up, changing into a clean blue dress and pinning her hair properly. Magnus had cleaned up as well, she noticed. His hair was still damp, suggesting he had bathed. And he wore a clean shirt, though still the practical buckskin and wool of a frontiersman. He looked uncomfortable, holding the wildflowers he had clearly picked for her, as though unsure of the gesture. I thought these might brighten the place, he said gruffly, handing them over. Olivia felt warmth bloom in her chest. They are lovely. Thank you. They ate at the small table in the kitchen, and Olivia was pleased to see Magnus eat heartily, complimenting her cooking. Conversation started slowly, both of them feeling their way through unfamiliar social territory, but gradually became easier. Magnus told her about the land around hot springs, about the Black Hills and the wildlife, about the best places to fish and the hidden meadows where wildflowers grew in summer. Olivia shared stories about her childhood in Pennsylvania, carefully editing out the worst parts about her father's drinking and gambling, focusing instead on happier memories of her mother before she passed. "What made you come west originally?" Olivia asked, then immediately regretted the question when she saw Magnus's expression shudder. "Needed a change," he said simply. "Like you, I suppose." Olivia did not press, respecting his privacy even as she longed to know more about this complex man. Instead, she asked about practical matters, about running the boarding house and what to expect from the town. "You will want to advertise in the mining camps," Magnus advised. "Hot Springs is a stopping point for prospectors heading into the hills. They need clean beds and decent food. Your aunt had a good reputation, so that will help. But you will need to be careful too. Not everyone who comes through is trustworthy." "I can handle myself," Olivia said with more confidence than she felt. Magnus looked at her seriously. "I am sure you can. But you are also alone here, and that makes you vulnerable. Those men today, they have not been caught yet. I do not want to frighten you, but you should be aware." "Will you keep looking for them?" Olivia asked. "Yes," Magnus said. "It is what I do sometimes. Help the sheriff track down troublemakers. The law is stretched thin out here, and I know the backcountry better than most. Is not that dangerous?" The thought of Magnus confronting those armed men again made Olivia's stomach twist with worry. Something in Magnus's expression softened. "I am careful, and I have been taking care of myself in the wilderness for a long time. But I appreciate the concern." They talked until the candles burned low, and Olivia realized with surprise how comfortable she felt with Magnus. Despite his imposing size and rough exterior, he was thoughtful and surprisingly gentle. There was a kindness in him that he tried to hide behind stoic reserve, but Olivia could see it clearly. When Magnus finally stood to leave, Olivia walked him to the door, reluctant to see the evening end. "Thank you for dinner," Magnus said. "It has been a long time since I had a home-cooked meal. I had forgotten how nice it could be." "You are welcome here anytime," Olivia said, meaning it completely. "I owe you my life, Magnus. That is not something I will forget." Magnus looked as though he wanted to say something more, his gray eyes searching her face. But whatever words he was considering remained unspoken. Instead, he simply tipped his hat and disappeared into the night, leaving Olivia standing on the porch with her heart beating faster than it should. Over the following weeks, Olivia threw herself into renovating the boarding house. She scrubbed and painted, repaired broken furniture, and gradually brought the place back to life. The townspeople were welcoming, and true to Magnus's prediction, she soon had several miners as regular boarders. The work was hard, from cooking breakfast before dawn to changing linens late into the evening. But Olivia found satisfaction in building something of her own. Magnus appeared regularly, though he never announced his visits. He would simply show up with fresh game for her larder or lumber for repairs that needed doing. He fixed the sagging porch steps, replaced broken windows, and reinforced the roof against the coming winter. Olivia insisted on paying him, but Magnus always refused, saying it was neighborly help, nothing more. But it felt like more. Olivia could not deny the way her heart lifted whenever she saw Magnus riding down Maple Street, could not ignore the electricity that sparked between them whenever their hands accidentally touched while working together. They would share meals, talking late into the evening about everything and nothing. And Olivia found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, dreams and fears she had kept locked away. Magnus, in turn, slowly opened up about his past. He told her about growing up in Montana, about learning to trap and hunt from his father, about the small cabin where his family had lived. He spoke haltingly about the fire that had taken his parents and younger sister, about how he had been away checking traps and had returned to find nothing but ashes. The guilt in his voice when he talked about it broke Olivia's heart. "You could not have known," she told him gently one evening as they sat on the newly repaired porch, watching the sun set over the Black Hills. "You cannot blame yourself for being alive when they are not." "I know that in my head," Magnus said quietly. "But my heart is slower to accept it. That is why I went into the mountains. Seemed easier to be alone than to be around people and remember what I lost." "And now?" Olivia asked softly. Magnus turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Now, I am finding reasons to come down from the mountains." The air between them felt heavy with unspoken feelings. Olivia wanted to reach for him, to close the distance between them, but fear held her back. What if she was misreading the situation? What if Magnus simply saw her as a friend, nothing more? Before either of them could act on the moment, a commotion from down the street shattered the spell. Raised voices and the sound of breaking glass sent Magnus to his feet instantly, his hand going to the knife at his belt. "Stay here," he ordered, already moving toward the noise. But Olivia was not the type to hide while others faced danger. She followed at a safe distance and saw that a fight had broken out at the saloon. Two miners were brawling in the street while others cheered them on. Magnus waded into the crowd without hesitation, his size and presence enough to make men step back. He grabbed both fighters by their collars and physically separated them, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Enough. Take your disagreement somewhere else or sleep it off. But there will be no more fighting tonight." The authority in Magnus's voice was absolute. Even drunk and angry, the miners recognized someone who would not be argued with. They grumbled but dispersed, and Magnus stayed until the crowd broke up completely. When he returned to where Olivia waited, he looked frustrated. "I told you to stay at the boarding house." "And I chose to follow," Olivia replied calmly. "I am not a child, Magnus. I do not need to be ordered about." For a moment, Magnus looked like he might argue, but then his expression shifted to something almost like admiration. "No, you certainly are not a child. You are one of the bravest women I have ever met, Olivia Nash." The use of her first name, spoken in that deep, rough voice, sent warmth spreading through Olivia's chest. "I learned a long time ago that you cannot hide from life, no matter how frightening it might be. You have to face it head on. Is that what you are doing here? Facing life?" Magnus asked. "I am trying to," Olivia admitted. "Some days are easier than others." They walked back to the boarding house together, and this time, when Magnus prepared to leave, Olivia found the courage to reach for his hand. His fingers, rough and calloused, closed around hers carefully, as though she were something precious and fragile. "I am glad you came down from the mountains," Olivia said quietly. "I am glad I get to know you." Magnus lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture surprisingly tender from such a rough man. "So am I, Olivia. So am I." After that night, something shifted between them. The tension that had been building found new expression in lingering looks and careful touches. Magnus began staying later when he visited, helping Olivia with evening chores and walking her through town when she needed supplies. People began to talk, as people in small towns always did. But Olivia found she did not care. Let them gossip. She was falling in love with Magnus Hale, and she suspected he felt the same. October brought cooler weather and the first hints of coming winter. The leaves on the aspens turned brilliant gold, and the air took on a crisp quality that made everything feel sharper, more alive. Olivia's boarding house was now full, her reputation as a good cook and fair landlady spreading through the mining camps. She had even hired a young woman named Sarah to help with the cleaning, giving her time to manage the business properly. Magnus had been away for nearly a week, tracking the bandits who had tried to rob the Stagecoach. The sheriff had asked for his help after another attempted robbery, and Magnus had agreed despite Olivia's worry. She tried not to let her fears show, knowing Magnus was capable and experienced. But every night he was gone felt endless. When he finally rode back into Hot Springs on a gray October afternoon, Olivia was hanging laundry in the backyard. She heard his horse first, that distinctive rhythm she had come to recognize, and her heart soared. Dropping the sheet she had been pinning, she rushed around the side of the house and saw Magnus dismounting in front. He looked exhausted, with several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw and dust coating his clothes. But he was whole and unharmed. Relief flooded through Olivia so intensely that she acted without thinking, running to him and throwing her arms around his neck. Magnus caught her easily, his arms coming around her waist and lifting her off her feet. For a moment, they simply held each other, and Olivia felt the tension drain out of Magnus's powerful frame. "I was so worried," she whispered against his shoulder. "I am all right," Magnus murmured into her hair. "We caught them, Olivia, all three of them. They will stand trial in Deadwood next month. No one else will be hurt by them." Olivia pulled back enough to look at his face, her hands framing his bearded jaw. "You could have been killed, but I was not," Magnus said gently. "I promise you, I am careful. I would not take unnecessary risks." "Why not?" Olivia asked, her emotions too raw to hide. "What reason do you have to be careful? You have said yourself you live alone, that you have no one." Magnus's gray eyes darkened with emotion. His large hands came up to cover hers where they still touched his face. "I have someone now," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "If you will have me, Olivia. I know I am not much. I live rough. I am gone more than I am around, and I have more ghosts than any man deserves. But I am falling in love with you, and I cannot keep pretending otherwise." Tears blurred Olivia's vision. "You think you are not much? Magnus, you are everything. You are brave and kind and good, and yes, I will have you. I have been in love with you since that first day, I think, when you rode out of nowhere like some guardian angel and saved my life." Magnus's smile transformed his entire face, making him look younger and lighter than Olivia had ever seen. Then he was kissing her, his lips finding hers with a tenderness that made her melt against him. The kiss was careful at first, almost hesitant, but deepened as Olivia responded, her fingers threading through his long hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Magnus rested his forehead against hers. "I do not know how to do this properly," he admitted. "I have lived alone so long, I am not sure I remember how to be with someone." "We will figure it out together," Olivia promised. "That is what people do when they love each other. They learn and grow together." Over the following weeks, Magnus and Olivia navigated the new territory of their relationship. Magnus was tentative at first, as though afraid he might break something precious. But Olivia encouraged him to be himself, to share his world with her. He took her riding through the foothills, showing her the places he loved, the hidden valleys and crystal-clear streams. He taught her to read the forest, to identify animal tracks, and predict weather from the clouds. In turn, Olivia brought warmth and domesticity back into Magnus's life. She mended his clothes, packed him supplies when he had to travel, and made sure he knew he always had a place to return to. The boarding house became a home, not just for her paying guests, but for Magnus as well. He still maintained his cabin in the mountains, but he spent more nights in the small room off the kitchen that Olivia kept for him than he did in the wilderness. The town adjusted to seeing them together, and most people seemed pleased. Magnus had always been respected for his skills and his willingness to help when needed, and Olivia's kindness had won her friends. They made sense together, the mountain man and the boarding house keeper, two lonely souls who had found each other in the vast wilderness of the West. As winter approached, Magnus became more insistent about preparing Olivia for the harsh months ahead. He brought in cord after cord of firewood, stacking it neatly behind the boarding house. He checked every window and door for drafts, insulated the root cellar, and taught Olivia how to preserve meat and vegetables for the lean times. "You are worrying too much," Olivia teased one November evening as Magnus checked the window seals for the third time. "We will be fine. Winter in the Black Hills is not something to take lightly," Magnus said seriously. "I have seen people die from being unprepared. I will not let that happen to you." Olivia crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek against the broad expanse of his back. "I know, and I love that you want to take care of me. But you have to trust that I can handle difficulty. I am stronger than I look." Magnus turned in her embrace and pulled her close. "I know how strong you are. You came to a frontier town alone with nothing but courage and determination. And you built a life here. You amaze me every day, Olivia. But loving you means wanting to protect you from every hardship, even when I know you do not need protecting." "Then love me as an equal," Olivia said, looking up at him. "Protect me when I need it. Trust me when I do not. Can you do that?" Magnus studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I can try. Old habits run deep, but for you, I will try." The first major snowfall came in early December, transforming hot springs into a winter wonderland. The boarding house stayed busy with miners who had come down from the higher elevations for the season, and Olivia was grateful for the income, even as the work intensified. Magnus helped whenever he could, chopping wood and hauling water, making repairs, generally being indispensable. One evening, as they sat by the fire in the common room after the boarders had retired, Magnus seemed unusually nervous. He kept shifting in his chair, his hands restless in a way Olivia had never seen. "Is something wrong?" she asked, setting aside her mending. Magnus took a deep breath, then slid from his chair to kneel in front of her. From his pocket, he pulled out a small carved box. "I made this," he said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "I am not much for speeches, Olivia, and I do not have fancy words. But I know that I love you more than I thought I could ever love anyone. You brought light back into my life when I thought there was only darkness ahead. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my days making you happy?" Olivia opened the box with trembling fingers and found a simple gold ring inside. It was not elaborate, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, and she could see the care that had gone into choosing it. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Magnus, I will marry you." Magnus slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I will be a good husband to you," he promised. "I swear it, Olivia. You will never regret choosing me." "I could never regret it," Olivia whispered. "You are my heart, Magnus Hale." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church, with most of the town in attendance. Olivia wore a simple cream-colored dress that she had sewn herself, and Magnus looked almost uncomfortable in a proper suit that he had purchased for the occasion. But when he saw her walking down the aisle, his face lit up with such joy that Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but the emotion behind them was profound. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Magnus kissed her with a tenderness that made the congregation sigh collectively. Olivia had never been happier than she was in that moment, standing beside the man she loved and knowing they had a future together. The wedding celebration was held at the boarding house, with the townspeople bringing food and drink, filling the rooms with laughter and music. Magnus stayed close to Olivia's side the entire time, his hand finding hers whenever they were separated, as though he needed to reassure himself that she was real. When the guests finally departed and they were alone, Magnus carried Olivia up the stairs to the room they would now share, the one that had been Olivia's alone. He set her down gently, his hands framing her face. "I love you," he said simply. "I will spend every day showing you how much." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a joining not just of bodies, but of souls. Magnus was careful with Olivia, mindful of her innocence, but there was fire beneath his gentleness, and Olivia met him with her own passion, unafraid to show her love in the most intimate way possible. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Olivia traced the scars on Magnus's chest, marks from his years in the wilderness. "Tell me about each one," she whispered. "I want to know all of you." So Magnus told her, his deep voice rumbling in his chest as she listened. Stories of bear encounters and falls from cliffs, of knife fights with hostile prospectors and near misses with mountain lions. Each scar was a lesson learned, a reminder that he had survived. "Now your turn," Magnus said, his fingers trailing over the small scar on Olivia's shoulder. "Where did this come from?" "I fell from a fence when I was 7, Olivia admitted. "I was trying to reach an apple tree and misjudged the distance." Magnus pressed a kiss to the old wound. Brave, even as a child. They talked through the night, sharing histories and dreams, cementing the bond between them. And when dawn broke over the black hills, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, Olivia knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. The winter passed in a blur of activity and contentment. Magnus moved his few possessions from his cabin in the mountains to the boarding house, though he kept the cabin maintained for when they needed a retreat from the bustle of town life. He continued to help the sheriff occasionally, tracking down troublemakers or guiding lost travelers to safety, but he was always careful to return home to Olivia. Olivia thrived with Magnus by her side. The boarding house's reputation grew, and she found herself turning away business because they were full. She and Sarah worked well together, and Magnus helped with the heavy labor, allowing Olivia to focus on the cooking and management that she enjoyed. Their life together fell into a comfortable rhythm. Magnus would wake before dawn to stoke the fires and feed the horses they kept in the small stable behind the boarding house. Olivia would prepare breakfast for the boarders while Magnus chopped wood or made repairs. They would steal moments throughout the day, a kiss in the pantry, a lingering touch as they passed in the hallway. Evenings were spent together, sometimes with guests in the common room, sometimes alone by their bedroom fire. In February, Olivia began to suspect she was pregnant. Her monthly cycle had always been regular, and when it failed to appear, accompanied by bouts of morning nausea. She felt a mix of joy and trepidation. She waited another few weeks to be certain before telling Magnus, wanting to be sure before she raised his hopes. When she finally revealed the news one evening, Magnus was silent for so long that Olivia began to worry. Then he dropped to his knees in front of where she sat, his large hands spanning her still flat stomach, and looked up at her with tears streaming down his bearded face. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Olivia asked, her own tears falling. "I know we have not been married long, and it is sooner than we might have planned." "Happy?" Magnus laughed, the sound breaking with emotion. "Olivia, I never thought I would have a family again. I thought I lost that chance forever. But now you have given me everything. A home, a wife I adore, and soon a child. How could I be anything but overjoyed?" He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. "I will take care of you both," he promised. "I swear it. Nothing will ever harm you or our child while I have breath in my body." "I know," Olivia said, running her fingers through his hair. "I have always known I was safe with you, Magnus. From that first day on the trail, I knew you were someone who protected others." Magnus's joy over the coming baby was evident in everything he did. He became even more protective of Olivia, insisting she rest more and take on less physical labor. He brought her small gifts, pretty stones from the hills and wildflowers when they began blooming in spring. He talked to her belly at night, his deep voice telling their unborn child about the world that awaited. As Olivia's pregnancy progressed, the boarding house continued to thrive. Sarah took on more responsibilities, and Magnus hired a young man named Thomas to help with the heavy work. This allowed Olivia to focus on the less strenuous aspects of running the business while still feeling useful. Magnus struggled with having to leave for his tracking work, but the sheriff needed his expertise, and they needed the income that supplemented what the boarding house brought in. Each time he rode out, Magnus would hold Olivia close, his hand on her growing belly, extracting promises that she would be careful in his absence. "I will be fine," Olivia would assure him. "Sarah and Thomas are here, and Mrs. Keller checks on me daily. You do what you need to do, and come home safe." In late June, Magnus took Olivia up to his cabin in the mountains for a few days' retreat. The journey was slow, with Magnus leading her horse carefully over the rocky trails. But the destination was worth it. The cabin was small but well built, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. A clear stream ran nearby, and wildflowers carpeted the meadow. "This is beautiful," Olivia breathed, taking in the peaceful surroundings. "I can see why you loved it here. I thought we might want a place to escape to sometimes," Magnus said, helping her dismount. "When the boarding house gets overwhelming or when we just want to be alone as a family. I have been making improvements, adding a room for the baby." Inside, the cabin was cozy and surprisingly comfortable. Magnus had indeed been working on it, adding a smaller room off the main space that would serve as a nursery. The furniture was simple but well made, clearly crafted by Magnus's own hands. They spent 3 peaceful days there, with Magnus fishing in the stream and hunting for their meals while Olivia rested and enjoyed the mountain air. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch watching the sun set, Magnus's hand on Olivia's belly feeling their child kick and move. "I have been thinking about names," Olivia said one evening. "If it is a boy, what about Matthew? It was my grandfather's name." "Matthew Hale," Magnus said, testing the sound. "I like it. And if it is a girl?" "I thought perhaps Grace, if that suits you. It means blessing, and that is what this child is to us." Magnus pressed a kiss to her temple. Perfect, Matthew or Grace Hale. Either way, they will be loved beyond measure. When they returned to Hot Springs, Olivia felt refreshed and ready for the final weeks of pregnancy. As July heated the town and the boarding house stayed full of miners avoiding the worst of the summer sun, Olivia found herself increasingly uncomfortable. Her back ached constantly, her feet swelled, and sleeping became nearly impossible. Magnus was endlessly patient, rubbing her back and propping pillows to help her find comfortable positions. He brought her cool drinks and fanned her on the hottest days. The boarders, too, showed kindness, offering to help with tasks and generally trying to make things easier for their heavily pregnant landlady. In early August, Olivia's labor began in the middle of the night. She woke Magnus with a hand on his shoulder, her voice calm despite the pain. "It is time. The baby is coming." Magnus was out of bed instantly, his usual calm competence replaced by barely controlled panic. "I will get the doctor. And Mrs. Keller, you should lie down. Are you in much pain? What do you need?" Despite the contraction that was gripping her, Olivia could not help but smile at her normally unflappable husband's distress. "Magnus, breathe. Go get Mrs. Keller first. She will know what to do. Then the doctor. But there is time yet." Mrs. Keller arrived quickly, her experience as a midwife evident in her brisk efficiency. She shooed Magnus from the room despite his protests, telling him firmly that this was women's work and he would only be in the way. The doctor arrived an hour later, but by then Mrs. Keller had everything well in hand. Magnus paced the hallway outside the bedroom for hours, wearing a path in the floorboards. The other boarders tried to distract him, offering drinks and conversation, but nothing could ease his anxiety. Every sound from the bedroom made him tense, and Olivia's cries of pain nearly drove him to break down the door more than once. Finally, as the sun was rising on August 12th, 1879, a new sound filled the boarding house, the thin, powerful wail of a newborn baby. Mrs. Keller opened the door moments later, her face beaming. "You have a son, Magnus. A healthy, strong boy. And Olivia did beautifully. She is tired but well." Magnus was through the door before she finished speaking. He found Olivia propped up in bed, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale with exhaustion. But her smile was radiant. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was their son. "Come meet Matthew," Olivia said softly. Magnus approached slowly, almost reverently, as though afraid he might disturb the moment. When he looked down at the tiny face of his son, something inside him broke open. The baby had dark hair like his father and was already showing signs of being a sturdy child. His eyes, when they briefly opened, were the deep blue of all newborns. But Magnus could see hints of what might become gray like his own, or perhaps the warm brown of Olivia's. "He is perfect," Magnus whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Can I hold him?" Olivia carefully transferred their son into Magnus's massive hands. The contrast between the tiny infant and the powerful mountain man almost comical. But Magnus held him with exquisite gentleness, his expression full of wonder. "Hello, Matthew," he murmured. "I am your father, and I promise you I will always protect you. You and your mother are my whole world now." A tear rolled down Magnus's cheek and splashed on the blanket. He looked up at Olivia, his eyes shining. "Thank you. Thank you for giving me this, for giving me a family again. I never thought I deserved a second chance. But somehow you saw something in me worth loving." "I saw the real you," Olivia said, reaching up to touch his face. "The man you always were beneath the grief and isolation. You are a good man, Magnus Hale. and you are going to be a wonderful father." The first weeks with baby Matthew were both exhausting and joyful. He was a good baby, sleeping in reasonable stretches and nursing well. But the adjustment to parenthood was significant. Magnus took over even more of the boarding house duties, allowing Olivia to rest and recover while focusing on the baby. He was a natural father, patient and gentle despite his size. He would walk the floor for hours with Matthew when the baby was fussy, his deep voice singing old mountain songs. He changed diapers without complaint and seemed to have no fear of handling his tiny son. The townspeople were delighted with the new addition to the Hale family. Gifts appeared regularly: baby clothes and blankets, toys carved by skilled hands. Mrs. Keller became a frequent visitor, offering advice and help whenever needed. As summer turned to fall, Matthew grew and thrived. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and already showing signs of his father's strong build. Olivia would sit on the porch in the warm September evenings, nursing her son while Magnus worked in the yard, and feel overwhelmed by the completeness of her life. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she told Magnus one evening as they watched Matthew sleep in his cradle. 2 years ago, I was alone and frightened, running from my father's debts with nothing but hope to sustain me. Now I have you and Matthew, and a life I love. It seems almost too good to be true." "It is true," Magnus assured her, pulling her close. "And it is just the beginning, Olivia. We have our whole lives ahead of us." The winter of 1879 was harsh, with heavy snows that isolated hot springs for weeks at a time. But the Hale family was snug in the boarding house, with plenty of provisions and the warmth of their love to sustain them. Matthew was growing quickly, reaching for objects and babbling in the language only babies understand. Magnus had largely stopped taking tracking work during the winter, wanting to stay close to his family. The boarding house income was sufficient, especially with fewer travelers during the cold months, meaning less work. He spent the time making improvements to the property and crafting furniture for Matthew as he grew. In the spring, when Matthew was 9 months old and pulling himself up on furniture, Magnus took his small family back to the mountain cabin for a week. It was Matthew's first trip, and both parents were anxious about managing a baby in the wilderness. But Matthew seemed to love it, fascinated by the birds and the trees, laughing at the sound of the stream. "He has your love of the mountains," Olivia observed, watching Magnus show their son a butterfly that had landed on his hand. "And your fearlessness?" Magnus replied, grinning as Matthew reached for the insect without hesitation. "He is going to be a handful when he gets bigger." "We will manage," Olivia said confidently. "Together, we can handle anything." As Matthew approached his first birthday, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again. The news was less surprising this time, but no less joyful. Magnus was thrilled at the prospect of another child, though he worried about Olivia managing the boarding house with 2 little ones. "We will figure it out," Olivia assured him. "Sarah has become indispensable, and Thomas has grown into the work. And you are the best partner I could ask for, Magnus. We are a team." Matthew's first birthday in August 1880 was celebrated with a party that filled the boarding house. The boy was walking now, toddling around on unsteady legs, and his personality was emerging. He was bold and curious, constantly getting into things, with his father's strength and his mother's determination. As Olivia's second pregnancy progressed, Matthew seemed to sense something was changing. He became more clingy with his mother, wanting to be held and reassured. Magnus spent extra time with his son, taking him on short trips around town and beginning to teach him about the natural world, even though Matthew was too young to understand much. In March 1881, Olivia gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace, just as they had planned. She was smaller than Matthew had been, with delicate features and her mother's auburn hair. From the moment she was born, it was clear that Grace would be different from her brother. Where Matthew had been bold and loud, Grace was quieter, more observant. Magnus was instantly smitten with his daughter, this tiny girl who fit in his large hands like she had been made to be protected by him. "She is beautiful," he whispered, cradling her with the confidence of an experienced parent. "Just like her mother." Matthew was initially uncertain about the new baby, but with encouragement from his parents, he quickly warmed to his little sister. He would bring her toys and pat her head gently, saying "baby" in his limited vocabulary. Life with 2 children was challenging, but deeply fulfilling. The boarding house continued to prosper, and Magnus's tracking work brought in additional income during the seasons when he felt comfortable being away. They had found a rhythm as a family, with Magnus and Olivia working together to manage both the business and the children. As the children grew, Magnus began teaching them about the wilderness he loved. Matthew was 4 when his father first took him camping, just the 2 of them spending a night under the stars. The boy returned full of excitement, talking non-stop about the deer they had seen and the fish they had caught. Grace, at 3, was more interested in the garden Olivia had established behind the boarding house. She would follow her mother around, learning the names of plants and helping to water and weed. She had a gentle soul, that one, with a particular affinity for animals. Stray cats and injured birds always seemed to find their way to Grace, who would nurse them back to health with tender care. By 1885, the Hale family was a well-established part of Hot Springs. Matthew was 6 and already helping his father with tasks around the boarding house, his small muscles showing promise of the strength he would develop. Grace was 4, attending the new school that had opened in town and showing a natural talent for reading. Magnus, now 33, had fully settled into family life while maintaining his connection to the wilderness. His hair was longer than ever, often tied back while he worked, and the lines around his eyes had deepened from years of squinting at distant horizons. But he was happy in a way he had never imagined possible after losing his first family. Olivia, at 30, had grown into her role as a business owner and mother with Grace. The boarding house was now one of the most successful establishments in Hot Springs, known for its cleanliness, good food, and the warmth of its proprietors. She had hired additional help over the years, allowing her more time with her children while still maintaining the high standards that had built her reputation. One evening in late May, after the children were in bed, Magnus and Olivia sat on their porch watching the stars emerge over the Black Hills. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together after the busyness of the day. "Do you ever regret it?" Magnus asked suddenly. "Coming west, I mean. Taking a chance on a life so different from what you knew?" Olivia looked at her husband, this strong, gentle man who had saved her life in more ways than one. "Not for a single moment. Everything that happened, all the fear and uncertainty, led me here to you and to this life we have built. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Magnus took her hand, his thumb tracing the ring he had given her 7 years ago. "I was so lost before you came into my life. I was just existing, not really living. You showed me that it was possible to love again, to have hope again. You and the children are everything to me. And you are everything to us," Olivia said, leaning into his solid warmth. "Our protector, our provider, our heart. I love you, Magnus Hale." "I love you too," Magnus murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Always and forever." As they sat there in comfortable silence, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She remembered the terrified young woman on that stagecoach, wondering what her future held. She remembered the first sight of Magnus, this fierce mountain man who had ridden to her rescue without hesitation. And she remembered every moment since, the slow building of trust and friendship that had blossomed into the deepest love she had ever known. Life in Hot Springs continued its steady pace. Seasons turned, children grew, and the Hale family thrived. Magnus took on more responsibility in town, serving on the town council and helping to establish better protection for travelers on the roads. The bandit problem that had once plagued the region was largely resolved, though Magnus still occasionally helped the sheriff with tracking or search and rescue operations. Olivia expanded the boarding house, adding several rooms to accommodate the growing demand. Hot Springs was developing rapidly as more settlers moved into the region, and her business grew with it. She became known not just for her hospitality, but for her generosity, often helping new arrivals get established and providing work to those who needed it. Matthew grew into a sturdy boy who loved the outdoors as much as his father. By age 8, he was already an accomplished rider and could handle basic trapping and hunting. But he also showed surprising sensitivity, particularly with his younger sister, whom he defended fiercely against any slight. Grace, at 7, was proving to be a scholar. She devoured books and was already helping to teach the younger children at school. But she had inherited her father's quiet strength and her mother's fierce determination. She might be gentle, but she was no pushover. In 1887, Olivia gave birth to their third child, another son they named Daniel. He came into the world in the early morning hours of a crisp October day, with his father pacing less frantically than he had with the first two, but still clearly anxious, until he heard that healthy first cry. Daniel was a surprise, not necessarily planned, but welcomed with joy. Matthew and Grace were both old enough to help with the baby, and they took to their roles as older siblings with enthusiasm. Matthew would hold his baby brother carefully, his young face serious with responsibility, while Grace sang lullabies she had learned at school. Magnus held his youngest son and marveled at how life kept surprising him with gifts he had not known to ask for. 3 healthy children, a thriving business, a wife he adored more with each passing year. It seemed impossible that he had once been the isolated man living alone in the mountains, convinced he deserved nothing better than solitude. As Daniel grew from infant to toddler, the Hale household was full of noise and activity. 3 children meant constant motion, questions, arguments, and laughter. The boarding house guests became accustomed to the sounds of family life, many of them commenting on how it made the place feel more like home. Magnus adjusted his work to be closer to home during Daniel's early years, not wanting to miss important moments. He remembered too well how quickly childhood passed, how Matthew had gone from baby to boy in what felt like a blink. He was determined to be present for all his children's lives. When Daniel was 3 and starting to show the same adventurous spirit as his older brother, Magnus began taking all 3 children on camping trips to the mountain cabin. These excursions became treasured family time, with Olivia packing elaborate picnics and Magnus teaching the children to fish, track animals, and respect the wilderness. Grace, now 10, had developed a particular interest in healing. She would collect plants under her mother's guidance, learning which ones had medicinal properties. Mrs. Keller, now in her 70s, but still active in the community, took Grace under her wing, teaching her the basics of nursing and midwifery. Matthew, at 12, was becoming a young man. He had his father's height and was developing the kind of broad-shouldered build that promised similar strength. He talked of becoming a guide or a tracker like Magnus, of living a life in the mountains. But he also showed interest in his mother's business, asking questions about management and finances that suggested he had inherited her practical intelligence. The year 1890 brought changes to Hot Springs and to the Hale family. South Dakota achieved statehood, and the town celebrated with a grand festival that lasted 3 days. The children were caught up in the excitement, and Magnus and Olivia allowed themselves to enjoy the festivities, secure in the life they had built. That summer, Magnus took Matthew on an extended camping trip, just father and son, deep into the Black Hills. It was a rite of passage, a chance for Magnus to share everything he knew about survival and self-reliance with his eldest child. They were gone for 2 weeks, and when they returned, Matthew had a new maturity about him, a confidence that came from testing himself against the wilderness and succeeding. Grace, meanwhile, had begun helping Mrs. Keller with actual medical cases, assisting with minor injuries and ailments under the older woman's supervision. At 13, she was remarkably composed and capable, with gentle hands and a soothing presence that put patients at ease. Daniel, now 6, was the wild card of the family. He had more energy than seemed possible for one small body, constantly climbing things he should not and exploring places he had been told to avoid. He kept his parents on their toes, but his infectious joy and fearless nature made it impossible to stay angry with him for long. As the family sat down for dinner one evening in late September 1890, Olivia looked around the table at her husband and children and felt her heart swell with gratitude. This was what she had dreamed of during those dark days after her father's death, during the uncertain journey west. A family, a home, a life filled with love and purpose. "What are you thinking about?" Magnus asked, noticing her expression. "Just how blessed we are," Olivia replied, reaching across to take his hand. "Look at what we have built together, Magnus. 3 beautiful children, a successful business, a life most people only dream of. And it all started with you riding out of nowhere to save a frightened woman on a stagecoach." Magnus smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his rugged face. "Best decision I ever made. Stopping those bandits led me to you." "I want to hear the story again," Daniel demanded, as he always did when his parents referenced how they met. So Magnus told it once more, embellishing slightly for dramatic effect as the children listened with rapt attention, even though they had heard it dozens of times. He told them about the 3 armed men stopping the stagecoach, about riding down from the hills and driving them off, about seeing their mother for the first time and knowing somehow that his life was about to change. "And then, what happened?" Grace prompted, even though she knew every word. "Then your mother invited me to dinner," Magnus continued, his eyes finding Olivia's across the table. "And I fell in love with her over roasted chicken and potatoes. Simple as that." "It was not that simple," Olivia interjected, laughing. "It took months before we admitted how we felt. But we got there," Magnus said, "and every day since has been a gift." Later, after the children were in bed, Magnus and Olivia took their customary place on the porch. The night air was cool with the promise of coming autumn, and the stars spread endlessly overhead. "Do you think they understand?" Olivia asked quietly. "How lucky we are. How easily things could have been different." "They will," Magnus said. "As they grow and face their own challenges, they will understand. But for now, let them have the innocence of thinking life is always this good. There is time enough for harder lessons." "You have become quite the philosopher," Olivia teased. "Living with you has made me think more deeply about things," Magnus admitted. "Before, survival was enough. Now I want to understand, to appreciate every moment. You did that for me, Olivia. You taught me to live again, not just survive." The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of a life well lived. Matthew turned 15 in 1893 and began working regularly with his father, learning not just wilderness skills, but also the tracking and security work that Magnus still did occasionally. The boy was already as tall as his father and still growing, with the same powerful build and natural strength. Grace, at 16, had become Mrs. Keller's unofficial apprentice. The old midwife was training her carefully, recognizing in Grace a true talent for healing. She was gentle but not squeamish, compassionate but practical, exactly the qualities needed for the work. Daniel, at 9, was still the wild child of the family, though he was beginning to show signs of settling down slightly. He had discovered a talent for drawing and would spend hours sketching the animals and landscapes around hot springs. Magnus encouraged this, recognizing it as another way of connecting with the natural world. The boarding house had been expanded twice more and now employed 6 people besides family members. Olivia had become one of the most successful businesswomen in the region, respected for her acumen and her fairness. She served on various town committees and was frequently consulted on matters of business and development. Magnus, at 41, was still as strong as ever, though his hair was now streaked with silver and his beard had gone mostly gray. He had become something of a legend in the Black Hills, the mountain man who had settled down but never lost his edge. Young men sought him out for advice about wilderness living, and the sheriff still called on him when tracking expertise was needed. One spring day in 1894, Matthew approached his parents with a proposition. "There is a group organizing an expedition into the Badlands," he said. "They need guides who know the territory. I would like to go." Magnus studied his son carefully. At 16, Matthew was technically still young, but he had more wilderness experience than many grown men. Still, the Badlands were unforgiving territory. "It would be dangerous," Magnus said. "The Badlands are not like the Black Hills. Water is scarce, the terrain is treacherous, and if something goes wrong, you are a long way from help." "I know," Matthew said steadily. "But I am ready. You have taught me well, Pa. I can handle it." Magnus looked at Olivia, seeing his own concern reflected in her eyes. But he also saw trust. Their son was capable and careful. They had raised him to be independent and responsible. "All right," Magnus said finally, "but I am going with you. Not because I do not trust you to handle it alone, but because I want to see this place too. We will go together." The expedition lasted 6 weeks, and when Magnus and Matthew returned, both were leaner and more weathered, but glowing with the satisfaction of a challenge met. They had stories of towering rock formations and hidden canyons, of fossils embedded in ancient stone and wildlife adapted to harsh conditions. Grace had managed the household in their absence, working alongside Olivia to keep everything running smoothly. She had also assisted with 2 births, both successful, cementing her reputation as a skilled healer in training. Daniel had missed his father and brother terribly, but had channeled that energy into his art, producing a series of sketches that showed remarkable talent for one so young. As the family reunited, there was a sense of things shifting, of children becoming adults and new chapters beginning. But through all the changes, the foundation remained solid. The love between Magnus and Olivia, the bond of family, the life they had built together. By 1896, Grace had officially taken over Mrs. Keller's practice when the old woman finally retired at 83. At 19, Grace was young for such responsibility, but she had proven herself capable time and again. She moved into a small house near the boarding house, establishing her independence while remaining close to family. Matthew, at 18, had started his own guide service, leading hunters and explorers into the backcountry. He was in high demand, known for his skills and his level-headed approach to danger. He still lived at home, though Magnus suspected that would change soon, given the way his son looked at the daughter of the local blacksmith. Daniel, at 12, was beginning to find his place in the world. He had his father's love of nature but expressed it through art rather than direct interaction. His sketches and paintings were remarkably good, and several merchants in town displayed his work. Magnus and Olivia, now in their 40s, had settled into a comfortable partnership that only deepened with time. They still ran the boarding house together, though with more help now. They still took trips to the mountain cabin, though sometimes it was just the two of them, reclaiming quiet moments alone. One evening in late summer, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the black hills in shades of purple and gold, Olivia leaned her head on Magnus's shoulder. "Do you remember that first night I invited you to dinner?" she asked softly. "Every detail," Magnus replied. "I was terrified, if you want to know the truth. I had been alone so long, I had forgotten how to be around people. But you made it easy. You have always made everything easier." "I was nervous too," Olivia admitted. "You were this enormous, fierce-looking man who had just fought off armed bandits. But then you were so gentle with those wildflowers you brought, so careful with your words. I saw past the mountain man exterior to the good heart underneath." "Best evening of my life," Magnus said. "Well, until the evening you agreed to marry me, and the evenings our children were born. All right, there have been a lot of best evenings." Olivia laughed, that warm, joyful sound that Magnus never tired of hearing. "We have been blessed, have we not? Far beyond what either of us could have imagined when we started." "More than blessed," Magnus agreed. "I was a dead man before you, Olivia. Breathing and walking around, but dead inside. You brought me back to life. You and our children gave me a reason to be more than just a survivor." They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to emerge. Nearly 20 years had passed since that day on the trail, when Magnus had ridden to Olivia's rescue. 20 years of building a life together, of facing challenges and celebrating triumphs, of growing individually and as a couple. The years that followed continued in this pattern of growth and change. Matthew married the blacksmith's daughter, Emily, in 1897, and they settled in Hot Springs with Matthew continuing his guide service. In 1898, they gave Magnus and Olivia their first grandchild, a robust boy they named Thomas Magnus. Grace married in 1899, choosing a young doctor who had recently moved to Hot Springs. Dr. James Wright was perfect for her, sharing her passion for healing and her gentle nature. They worked together, building a medical practice that served the growing town and surrounding areas. Daniel left for art school in Chicago in 1900, determined to develop his talent properly. It was hard for Olivia to see her youngest leave, but she understood his need to explore beyond the boundaries of Hot Springs. Magnus assured her that Daniel would return, that the mountains had a way of calling their children home. As the new century began, Magnus and Olivia found themselves transitioning into the role of elder statesmen of Hot Springs. They had been part of the community for over 2 decades, had helped it grow and develop. Their boarding house was now an institution, and their children were contributing to the town in their own ways. Magnus was 50 in 1902, his hair fully gray now, his face deeply lined by years of sun and wind. But he was still strong, still capable, still the man who could track a deer through difficult terrain or fell a tree with precise axe strokes. He had slowed down slightly, spending less time on extended trips and more time at home. But he was far from old. Olivia, at 46, had aged gracefully. Her auburn hair had silver threads running through it, and there were lines around her eyes and mouth. But they were laugh lines, marks of a life well lived. She had turned over much of the day-to-day operation of the boarding house to younger managers, though she still oversaw everything and maintained her high standards. Their children were grown and established in their own lives, but they remained close. Family dinners every Sunday brought everyone together, with grandchildren adding new noise and chaos that Magnus and Olivia adored. One evening in 1903, as they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, their children organized a party that filled the boarding house with friends and family. There were speeches and toasts, stories about Magnus and Olivia's life together, laughter, and a few tears. When Magnus stood to speak, the room fell silent. He was not a man of many words typically, and everyone wanted to hear what he would say. 25 years ago, I married the woman who saved my life, he began, his deep voice carrying easily. I know the story says I saved her from bandits, and I suppose that is true in one sense. But the truth is, Olivia saved me from a much worse fate. She saved me from loneliness, from despair, from a life half lived in the shadows of grief. He turned to face Olivia, his gray eyes bright with emotion. You taught me how to love again, how to hope again, how to be more than just a survivor. You gave me children, a family, a home. You gave me a reason to come down from the mountains and rejoin the world. Every good thing in my life traces back to you, Olivia Nash Hale. Olivia was crying openly now, as were several others in the room. Magnus took her hand and lifted it to his lips in the gesture that had become so familiar over their years together. I love you, he said simply. I have loved you from that first evening when you invited me to dinner. I will love you until my last breath and beyond, if such things are possible. Thank you for choosing me, for seeing something worth loving in a rough mountain man. Thank you for these 25 years of happiness. Olivia stood and embraced her husband, holding him tightly as the room erupted in applause. Thank you for riding to my rescue, she whispered against his chest. Thank you for being brave enough to love again. Thank you for being the man I knew you were from the very beginning. As the party continued around them, Magnus and Olivia held each other, surrounded by the family and community they had helped build, secure in the love that had sustained them through everything. Daniel returned from Chicago in 1904, his talent now refined and his reputation growing. But he had missed the West, missed the vast skies and the mountains, missed his family. He established a studio in Hot Springs and began documenting the West through his art, his paintings capturing the spirit of the frontier that was slowly modernizing. Grace and James had 2 children by then, and Matthew and Emily had added a daughter to their family. The Hale grandchildren were a boisterous group, and Magnus took great joy in teaching them the same lessons he had taught their parents. He was gentler now, more patient, his rough edges smoothed by age and happiness. The boarding house continued to thrive under the management team Olivia had trained, allowing her more free time. She and Magnus began taking longer trips to their mountain cabin, sometimes for weeks at a time, reclaiming the solitude they had known in their early days together. On one such trip in the summer of 1905, they sat by the stream as evening fell, the sound of rushing water and bird song filling the air. If you could go back, Magnus asked quietly, back to that day on the stagecoach, knowing everything that would come after, would you change anything? Olivia considered the question seriously. She thought about the fear she had felt, about the uncertainty and hardship of those early days. She thought about the challenges they had faced, the times when money had been tight, or illness had threatened, or worries had kept her awake at night. Not a single thing, she said finally. Every difficulty was worth it to get here, to this moment, to this life with you. I would live it all exactly the same. Magnus pulled her close, and they watched the stars emerge above the mountain peaks. Two people who had found each other against all odds built something beautiful together. The years that followed were gentle ones, the kind of peaceful decline into old age that many hoped for, but few achieved. Magnus remained active into his 60s, still hunting and fishing, still taking his grandchildren on camping trips, though he moved more slowly now and rested more often. Olivia spent her later years enjoying the fruits of her labor, secure in the knowledge that the business she had built would continue. She delighted in her grandchildren, teaching them to bake and garden, sharing stories of the old days when Hot Springs was barely more than a collection of rough buildings. As they aged, Magnus and Olivia grew even closer, their lives so intertwined that it was hard to imagine one without the other. They still took their evening walks when weather permitted, still sat on their porch watching the sunset, still held hands like young lovers. In 1910, on a warm August evening, Magnus and Olivia celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. The town threw a grand celebration, recognizing the couple who had been such an integral part of Hot Springs' development. All three children were there with their families, grandchildren running everywhere, the boarding house filled with love and laughter. Magnus was 78 now, his once powerful body finally showing real signs of age. He walked with a cane, his movements careful and deliberate. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Olivia had only deepened with time. Olivia, at 74, was frailer than she once had been, her hair snow-white and her hands showing the arthritis that plagued her. But her smile was still bright, her spirit still strong. As the party wound down and they found themselves alone on their porch once more, Magnus took Olivia's hand in his as he had done thousands of times before. 50 years, he marveled. Half a century with you, and it still does not feel like enough. We have been so blessed, Olivia said softly. 3 wonderful children, 7 grandchildren, a life full of love and purpose. What more could anyone ask for? More time, Magnus said quietly. I would always ask for more time with you. They sat in the darkness, holding hands, 2 souls who had found each other in the wilderness and never let go. The love that had begun on a dusty trail with an act of courage had grown into something vast and enduring, a testament to the power of 2 people choosing each other every single day. As the years continued, their children and grandchildren cared for them with the same devotion they had always shown their family. Magnus and Olivia remained in the boarding house, though they no longer worked, content to watch the business continue under capable management. They still took morning coffee on the porch when weather allowed, still shared the comfortable silence of 2 people who knew each other completely. And when Magnus finally passed peacefully in his sleep in 1913, at the age of 81, Olivia held his hand, whispering her love one last time. She followed him just 6 months later, as though unable to bear being separated from the man who had been her partner, protector, and great love for over 50 years. The family buried them side by side in the cemetery overlooking the Black Hills, with a simple headstone that read, Magnus and Olivia Hale, beloved parents and grandparents, together in life, together in eternity. Their legacy lived on through their children and grandchildren, through the boarding house that still bore the Morning Star name, through the stories that were told about the mountain man who had saved a frightened woman on a stagecoach and found his own salvation in the process. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West and lasting until the very end.